Hi everyone and welcome to the next episode of the Bitcoin Collective podcast, your journey into Bitcoin, sound money and macroeconomics with me, Jim.
And me, Jordan.
So Jordan, you've been quite a busy, industrious young chappie, haven't you?
Yeah, it's been some week. Last week was down in London, meeting up with some Bitcoiners, putting on a institutional Bitcoin workshop, meeting with some potential sponsors. Yeah, it's been full on, but in a good way, a very good way.
Well, that's good. It's been an interesting 7 days because obviously we've watched Bitcoin go from $16,500 to just over $21,000. And I think $21,000 was the kind of like, oh, can I get over 21? It was a kind of resistance point, I think.
Yeah, it's around there for the 200 week moving average.
Right. And that I think
So
that's
yeah,
what.
that's like usually the bottom. So that's where people labeled it as like a significant step.
And was that, I think that's also, when I look at the graphs and the technical analysis, that's what it was before the FTX scandal.
Yeah, true. Actually, that will have affected. It's like it's a black swan event.
Yeah.
It's going to affect that. So where would Bitcoin have gone if we didn't have FTX? It might
Yeah.
have just stayed around 21,000. But we had that and we flushed out a lot of bad actors, which was good. And we managed to get some sats pretty cheap.
Yeah, I suppose it was. I where I am in this just now is I'm really cheesed off
Why?
because I was with all the doom and gloomers hoping it would go down to 12 or 13,000 where I could buy like a. I was just going to go. I'm going to buy a full Bitcoin if it goes to that. I'm going to like sell the car and do it, and it didn't. The little honey badgers popped up to 21,000.
But I bet a lot of people would have been. Does that number just keep going down and down and down? Do you just say, oh, when it gets to? I'm not saying you. I'm just saying people in general. This is how like kind of investing goes, right? And it's like when it gets to this number, oh, I'll buy it. And I've been like, I put this in my notes to say this. Is like now there's going to be a lot of FOMO and regret that people didn't buy a lot more, a lot lower. When it was at 15,500, like, why didn't I do it? Why didn't I just buy some more? Who says it might? It probably will go back down again.
Exactly.
But
Exactly. So I've been listening to a few of the technical traders, and they are suggesting that. So they forecast this pump up to 20 odd thousand. They actually forecast it up to be 18 and a half. So it surpassed their expectations. And of course, they're now shorting it. And I looked today at the Bitcoin RSI, which is showing overbought. So you're right, it could probably lose a bit of energy, pop back down again. So, I mean, it caught me, I was surprised because I thought, where's this come from? And I know there was the CPI figures in America were quite good and quite positive, and everyone's feeling a bit, oh, maybe we raise rates and all the rest of it. But I thought that was an interesting. So somebody was buying it. For it to go up like that amount of money, somebody had to buy it.
yeah, for context, CPI, for anyone that doesn't know, is just the inflation rate. So in America, it was lower than projected, or it came down further than projected to six. Is it 6.5%? It's sitting at now in America.
Yeah, and the good thing about it is it's another manipulated stat because they keep changing the basket of goods that measures the CPI in America and is driving everyone nuts.
Mm-hmm.
However, it just shows you all of a sudden, I remember we were talking about, remember Bitcoin used to jump up $3,000, and there you go, in a week it jumped up $3,000. But I'm still hoping, and I don't want everyone to take this the wrong way, I'm hoping it falls back to $13,000 again, so I can buy a whole Bitcoin to add to my little collection. Little collection of Bitcoins.
Yeah, I mean,
Bitcoins.
what was that?
It's a wee Bitcoin.
What did you?
It's just.
Oh,
I
is
just
that the silver Bitcoin that we
I
got?
just collect little Bitcoins all over the place. I've got them all over. They're littered all over the house. Just Bitcoins. Everywhere you go, there's a Bitcoin in the room. What's that Bitcoin doing there? I thought I'd put that somewhere else. So, I mean, does it not feel to you, Jordan, and the listeners, that we are living in this matrix world just now? Let me explain.
Yeah, right.
Yeah, so you've got the Scottish government, and I know that lots of people listening around the world might think, "Oh, who cares about the Scottish government?" Well, it's almost like one of these little. It's a wee kiddie on government. It's like a pretend government, but they like to pay themselves lots of money, and they like to make sure that they're very important. So they've created this bill, and it's about trans people and giving them rights. And then what's happened is the Parliament at Westminster said, "Look, that doesn't quite fit with England. So we're going to have to um, invoke our powers and amend your bill," type of thing. And of course, I watched today all these Scottish national politicians getting so hot under the collar, losing the rag, all standing up, giving whipjacking speeches about la di da. And I thought, you guys are fucking off your heads. Because right now the world is burning, and the world is burning, and you're debating this. What? I understand it's so important to the people who are trans. I totally get that. But right now,
Mm.
all that parliamentary time should be focused on the cost of living crisis, the energy crisis, um, the monetary crisis, and then all these little things should just let's sort that first before we sort what changing room someone goes in. And it just, and I look at it, I think, this is the matrix we're living in. And they don't know it, Jordan. They're living in this. So those MPs and those MSPs are getting paid salaries, 80,000, 84,000, bang, they get that every month, plus all their expenses. And where does that come from, that money? That's the whole thing. They are living in this. They've got no clue that we're looking at them in the matrix going, poor fuckers. And I don't think they can reset it. I don't think they can do it. I think they're just like, we'll continue to make ourselves look really important, and we'll stand up there and give these barnstorming speeches while the world burns. And I think to myself, you've got Nadeem Sahawi, who's the senior Tory minister, and he was getting investigated for his tax affairs, and he's now agreed to pay whatever he's paid, 3 or 4 million, or whatever it is. And you're like, all this is going on. They're living their world in the Westminster bubble and the Holyrood bubble, while and then you've got Joe Biden. Oh, they're finding classified documents everywhere. The same way I've got Bitcoin dotted all over my house. He's got classified documents dotted all over the place. The dog's digging up holes and finding them. They're in the swimming pool. They're up in the loft, in the back of his Corvette. I mean, and where's the FBI? Donald Trump had got a full FBI banging in the doors. Joe Biden hasn't got that. The whole thing right now, when you actually look at it, is, and it's for Bitcoiners. If you get Bitcoin, you can see the matrix that we're living in.
It's not a. I think so. Peter Schiff tweeted this, and then I saw that you've tweeted it as well, about the Ponzi scheme, and
Yeah.
That's what we're living in right now, and it is like a distraction away from a Ponzi scheme. Is what we're seeing, is keeping the Ponzi going by just putting other bits in front of us and debating other things apart from the money. Because I'll read out what Peter Schiff
Never mind his.
tweeted.
Read mine. Mine was far better.
Are they not just the same?
No, mine. I put mine out and then
Okay.
Schiff copied me. It was me talking about the super Ponzi. It's a super Ponzi. And I know we're going to discuss that. Well, if you want to bring in Peter Schiff to this podcast, Sonny boy, you do that. But just remember, the listeners are going to crucify you. Right, shoot. Shoot
Right.
for Schiff.
Well, I can't even. You tweet so much, I can't even find it. So I'm going with Schiffy boy.
Okay.
So the U.S. Treasury Secretary has admitted the only way to avoid a default on the national debt is to raise the debt ceiling, so the government can borrow from new lenders to repay existing lenders. This amounts to an official admission that the US is running the world's largest Ponzi scheme. So I think it's important that I then looked up what is the actual definition of a Ponzi scheme.
Yes.
And a Ponzi scheme is a form of fraud that lures investors and pays profits to early investors with funds from more recent investors. It's the same thing. It's exactly the same thing. And that's what we're living in. When we're talking about living in the Matrix, are we just living in a Ponzi scheme?
So, just so you know, Jim Duffy, Bitcoin pleb for Dundee, has coined the phrase super Ponzi, American super Ponzi. Apparently Dan Held, James Lavish, Greg Foster, all going nuts. Like, hey man, he got super Ponzi before us. Jim is the super Ponzi guy. So, coming back to James Lavish's tweet, I mean, James Lavish put an absolutely first class. I mean, it was first class, wasn't it? I mean, if that was to be able to do that in such a clever way through a series of tweets and show you how the American debt will never be paid and how it was ramping up and it was actually scary. I thought it was great.
Yeah. So for anyone that's not right, I mean, we're going to talk through it just now in a very, very high level because James Lavish does it in such detail.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're going to talk through it, but it was a tweet that James put out, and I'll put it in the show notes. And it actually carried on from, I wonder if James listens to the podcast, but because it actually carried on from what we were talking about last week of looking at the debt and when will this ever stop? Will it ever stop? And that's exactly what James is looking into, but a lot more detail than we did.
So I think what you need to be aware of is that the White House, 10 Downing Street, and the Bute House in Scotland all stop when our pod goes out, and the first thing they do is listen to it. So I mean, I can see why James Lavish does, because if the president of the United States does, it's just one of these things. But what he did, so I've looked at the debt clock many a time. Now, if you go to usdebtclock.org, usdebtclock.org, and it's DET. This clock basically shows you the US debt, and then what it does is it segments it all down to different things. And I've looked at it so many times, and I've only looked at the headlines, Jordan. So, for example, when you talk about the US debt at almost $31.5 trillion. So I was like, that's terrible. But then when James said, well, this is all money that they've borrowed. They've borrowed it from other governments, from companies, and they've got to pay it back. I was like, that's when the penny dropped. It's not just like, oh, we'll just create it. They've actually got to pay that back.
Mm-hmm. Yeah,
and the debt interest on it.
Scheme.
Yeah. And the debt interest on it was just like, I could not believe that, how much they pay. And then every year it goes up by 1 point. So the actual deficit, so America, La 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 America. Everyone come to America. Right? Everyone's going to America, but it's burst. But if they're going there, it's asylum seekers down at the channel here. They're coming across thinking this is the land of milk and honey, but we're burst as well. So that they're living on a credit card, and that credit card in America costs them $1.3 trillion.
Nice.
So there's, just like you said, it's the Ponzi credit card, $1.3 million, just pop that on there, beep, no problem. And then they're doing that every year. So the actual debt's going up.
So can we just
And
pause for a second
that's
there?
the world. Yeah.
I love the living on a credit card. We've never said that before. And that's exactly what it's like. And that puts it in perspective to real people. And people maybe that aren't in Bitcoin and aren't in this matrix is countries living on credit cards. Just think of it like that.
Are you there, Jordan?
You good? Yeah.
It's just that you've faded away. You've gone off the screen here, so this is going to need to be edited because
Oh,
I just lost you. I just lost you there completely. But as long as you can hear me,
all right.
so I'll kick off.
Yeah, I can hear you.
So
All good.
you're right. So you're right. They are living on a credit card, and the thing is, so if you apply for a credit card, the first thing the credit company will do is they'll go to credit reference agencies, they'll check your credit score, they want to know how much money you earn, what your debts are. But America just like it just keeps on going. It's not like every year, Mr. Duffy, the limit in your credit card is £8,000. And I'm like, oh, that's okay. But that doesn't go up. They don't come to me next year and say the limit's £16,000. Because otherwise, right now, my limit would be £100,000. But in America, it just gets bigger and bigger each year. And that's the bit, Jordan, that is terrifying. And it's when he's it's when he looked at the numbers and he says, yeah, you can look at the national debt and you can look at all these numbers, but when you actually start looking at not just that, but you zoom in the clock and you look at all the different outside that debt, it's massive. It's something like 400. Is it 470 trillion?
It was a ridiculous number. Yeah, I can't
It's
remember
there.
what he called it.
It says the US government owes another 173 trillion. Now you've got to think about these numbers. We're using trillion. What the US government owes another $173 trillion to pay off various programs like Medicare and Social Security. That makes $204 trillion. He says, yes, $1 trillion that the US government currently owes people. And even he says, now a moment of silence for the US Treasury. What do you do?
Putting trillion into perspective, because this number gets thrown around and like they're just numbers. Like they're just numbers on the screen, but we're talking about trillion. So I just Googled put trillion into perspective. And the first thing that came up was $1 trillion would stretch nearly from the earth to the sun. How crazy is that? That $1
That's
trillion
amazing.
will stretch that to the sun. And that puts it into perspective how much we're actually talking about here. I mean, in distance. But it's wild. And then you're talking about, what was it, 170 odd trillion?
It gets worse. So what James Lavish, he finished off his essay and he said, by the year 2027, which is only, 4 years away, the CBO projects that the deficit, instead of being 1.3 trillion every year, will be 1.8 trillion, a jump of 40%, taking the national debt, which is now 31 trillion, to 44 trillion in 4 years. It's just crazy.
It's wild. And
So,
this is what we were talking about last podcast as well, right? we were like, when does
Yeah,
this stop? Like,
yeah.
what's it going to be like in 10 years? Well, that's just proven what it's going to be like in 4 years.
4 years. I just find that I found James Lavish's series of tweets just mind blowing for anyone. So when we talk about orange pilling, it doesn't matter whether you live in Iceland, Scotland, Turkey, Australia, Hong Kong, Venezuela, Argentina, Alaska. It makes no difference. In terms of orange pilling someone, you sit and you go through that and they go, oh, if you were to go through that and you could get them to understand it, say, oh, so basically America's burst and it's living in it's the biggest credit card. It's a constant credit card. Yes. And is that the same with other countries? Yes. Is the United Kingdom the same? Yes. Is Germany the same? Yes. Okay, so the world basically lives on the never never. And but Bitcoin's different. Oh right, because it's capped and you can't print. You could see how you could take that to an economics class at Oxford University and explain the difference between Keynesian and Austrian economics, and they would get it. They would just get it. So thank you, James
Mm-hmm.
Lavish.
Yes, thank you. And for everything that I think I'll put in the show description as well, his newsletter, and because I think everyone should sign up to it. But just the way that he tells stories and describes complex things to do with Bitcoin and finance is, yeah, impressive.
So moving things on a little bit, now that we've given everyone an economics lesson, where right now is the Bitcoin Fear and Greed Index? Because over the last 3 months it's been an extreme fear. Everyone's been terrified. Hence why I was hoping it would go down to $13,000 and I could buy some more. What's it sitting at now, Jordan?
I'm looking it up as we speak. It's at 51 and neutral.
51 in neutral. Isn't that amazing how in the space of, I guess, 2 weeks it's basically gone from extreme fear to everything's neutral. Nothing to see here, officer. These are not the droids you're looking for. La-di-da-di-da. But it's good that it's neutral just now, even though everything else is overbought.
Mm-hmm.
So, moving on to why I believe that. So, if you were to compare the US debt and Jim's super Ponzi, Jim's American super Ponzi theory, I'm going to have people phoning me up. Tell me about your super Ponzi theory. I remember Dan Hale did the super cycle. I'm going to be the
Yeah.
super Ponzi guy. Anyway, so you look at El Salvador, and I think we talked in the last pod about that. So they're getting their legislation together to do their volcano bonds.
Yes, they are indeed.
Okay, yeah. So they're doing that, and the idea is that they'll bring in $1 million or in US dollars value, and then they're going to put half of that, $500 million, in towards building Bitcoin City, and then the other half are just buying Bitcoin with it. But that's going to be, they're not just doing one round of bonds, because countries do lots of rounds of bonds if the first one's successful, and they're going to pay a coupon rate of 6.5%. So, but all hinged on the Bitcoin price going up. It's going to be hard for it not to go up when they're buying it that amount.
Mm-hmm.
But it's interesting that little country's decided we've played this game. It's time to change the rules of the game. I mean, you look at President Bukele's. I didn't realise the name of his political parties, New Ideas.
Oh,
That's the
really?
name of it, New Ideas. Yeah, yeah. So
Oh,
like Nuevo
wow.
Ideas or something. So it's not like we are the Christian Democrats or the socialist leftists. It's New Ideas. And I think He's been voted in, and they're like, if we continue to do what we'll do, we'll just be in this quagmire. Let's change the rules of the game. And I was thinking, wow. And if by June or July of this year they actually pull off these bonds and their GDP continues to go up, I had to laugh today. Some journalist in the Guardian was talking about the crypto experiment there, and it's all going. You're like, you've never even set foot in the country, mind you. Either have I, but I have been speaking to Doogie and Samson about a visit. But
I spoke to them the other day,
how
actually.
cool is that? Oh, good.
Anyway,
How cool is that if they pull that off?
it will be a massive step for the adoption of Bitcoin, because we're moving now to a nation state level, and it's still seen as an experiment, right, in El Salvador. But if they can release these bonds and launch these bonds, it gives it more credibility, and other countries will follow, right? And other countries that are getting suppressed by the US dollar, and yeah, they will follow in the footsteps of El Salvador. And I like to think that it will be a big success, but who knows in this world?
Well, what they're doing is they're sticking two fingers up to the IMF and the WEF, and they're saying, we don't want your money. We don't want your money, China. We're going to do it our way. We don't want your money, USA. We're going to do it our way. Now, if they can pull off a good, secure round of and get that first billion in the door, you're right. Other countries are going to look at it and go, well, if the bond market, which is worth, they talk about 300 trillion, if the bond market starts to push its money that way to sound money, then look at Japan just now. They can't sell their bonds. They can't give them away. There's big talk of Japan over the next couple of weeks. Where's that going to go? They're literally trying to print money and give it to people to take for 10 years, and nobody wants it. But isn't the El Salvador? It's when you start to put these things together, you can see how the El Salvador experiment, whatever you want to call it, actually looks really credible.
Hell yeah. Like, it's really good. I'm so excited to see what's going to happen to that country in the future. In 4 years, I think, like,
Yeah.
it's going to become evident. Like, if we're talking just a 4 year time, we're saying that US national debt's going to be 44 trillion by then. It'll be really interesting to compare that to El Salvador and what has happened there, because Bitcoin will have gone through the next halving by then as well.
Yes.
So,
Yeah.
wow. Yeah, it's going to be exciting to see what happens. And I think that there's going to be another country that adopts it this year.
So I am seriously thinking about having a trip down to El Salvador, and looking at potentially a property there. Now, it's scary at my age. I get a bit scary, but I spoke to Doogie. He's down there. He's got his family there in the flat. They're enjoying it. So they're really scoping it out. It's like, at some point you've got to go. Now, I get the El Zonte Beach and all that. I mean, I don't even know if El Zonte Beach is if it's just a bunch of rocks. Who knows? But interesting to see if you're going to build a brand new city based on geothermal and volcanic energy. See the amount of jobs and GDP they'll create as a result of that if they get it right. That could be stunning. Now, it may be 10 or 15 years till it all works out, but I just thought, wow, that's pretty cool compared to the US debt. It's just going up and up and up.
Yeah. And then it's hopefully the people, because a few documentaries that I've seen in El Salvador is like, it's getting adopted, but people still aren't fully educated on it. So I think there's still a
Yeah.
big, or just from an outside perspective, it looks like there is still a big education gap to fill. They've got it there ready, but it's just educating people on why they should be using it and why they should be holding it. And I mean, this segues us into what Caitlin Long tweeted, and
Yeah.
it was, yeah. Do you want to explain?
Yeah, so essentially, what somebody put a tweet out talking about they segmented the how many people from different age groups in America own Bitcoin, and it was a good, nice bit of research. And she came back now. For the audience, Caitlin Long is the CEO of Custodia Bank, and they're trying to get a Bitcoin banking license in what's the name of that state? It's
Is
not
it
Colorado.
Wyoming?
Wyoming. Wyoming, yeah, Wyoming. So, by the way, I don't think I want to go to Wyoming. I think I'd rather go to El Salvador. It's warmer. But essentially, the key takeaway, what she gleaned from that, was that 29% of American millennials, now that's a big number, own Bitcoin.
Mm-hmm.
And they've got they've got money and they've got jobs and they've got, she was talking about, there's a lot of them, move to places like Washington DC and they take these jobs there. So she said there's people in government as advisors and all the rest of it who get the whole Bitcoin thing and they've bought it. So it's not as if you can say, oh, it's just a few plebs, it's just a few sort of the subculture of Bitcoin. It's massive in America,
That's
and that's
the
going to create a lot of influence moving forward.
Yeah, that was the big thing, I think, is that there is 25% of Americans who earn over $100,000 per year own Bitcoin from
Yeah,
this study that was
yeah,
done, um, which actually gives significant power because, yeah, they might not all know about it or know everything about it. They might just have it and bought it on Coinbase or whatever. But it gives
yeah.
power to the people, and it's essentially, it could be seen as a fort. I don't know where I'm going with that. I'll put it up on the screen so people can read it.
So my again on the last pod, and we build. I mean, people think we just talk, but we're building stuff up all the time. So the last one we talked about how to orange pill people, and then we're bringing up talking about the debt. We're talking about countries that are trying to take a different route, but ultimately you still have to try an orange pill. And I think if you use that whole scenario with this, well, let me look at one country with all the debt and another one that's trying a different way with Bitcoin. You can see why. Oh, so Bitcoin's just not. It's not that thing there. It's not like it's actually something that a country is trying to build its economy on. Wow. Okay. And so you've got your case study. You've got your Harvard case study emerging right there in front of you, haven't you?
Yeah, and I think more universities, more colleges should be using El Salvador as a case study, right?
Yeah. Interesting that in the last bear market, when I was started to buy, I'm really sorry I was buying things like Cardano, but it did make me a lot of money, and I'm really sorry and all the rest of it. But um, when you haven't had the kind of bull market that we went through, so we had you and I and Chris etc. We're all buying, and we're buying and holding in the hope and the expectation that one day it would go, and then it went big style, didn't it? It was literally this year. It was this time 2 years ago because I remember you come into the living room in Tay Street, and I was like, "Whoa!" Remember, it was just going up and up. I went to hit 21 and 24, and we talked about Elon Musk, buying it and all that sort of stuff. And then we had that bull market. It was like, "Way, life is so good. Let's go surfing." And then boom, it's come down again. And if I'm being honest with the listeners, I've had a perk in my step this week because it jumped up that $3,000. And not, it wasn't the $3,000. It could have been 3 or 23. It was just the fact that it did it, and it's like it's still got because I know when it does go, boy, is it going to go big.
I think because it grinds you down, right? A bear market.
Yes,
Like it
totally.
tests you to see how far you can get, and then that little glimmer of I'm right. I'm right. I was right. It's going in the right
Yes.
direction now. I think that's what makes you more excited and does put that thing in your step or whatever you said.
Yeah, a spring in your step. And
Spring.
because
That's
there
the
was a
one.
short squeeze,
Hmm.
where all the folks shorting it gets squeezed out. They had to then buy it. There was talk of some institution buying $5 billion worth. I don't know if that was just all Twitter, um, you know, make believe. No idea, but something moved that price. Anyway, living in the matrix as we are with our orange pill. We took the orange pill, and we can see it's like you're walking around the matrix, and you can see what's going on. You can see the Scottish government debating this debate. You can see El Salvador, going and doing their thing. Yeah, and you're like, and you look at all this and you go, actually, it's okay living in the matrix because we know that finally the outcome will be good.
Hmm.
One more thing to add here, Jordan, and I know I've hogged this podcast a little bit, but one more thing to add. Did you see today at the World Economic Forum, Saudi Arabia said they're open? Is it open to? Is it trading in oil and another currency out with the US dollar?
I did not see that. No.
Yeah, so allegedly they're saying, well, it doesn't have to be the US dollar. Now, remember we talked about Saudi Arabia, Iran, Brazil, South Africa, China, and Russia all saying, well, we've had enough of the US dollar. And that credit card burst. Let's go and create our own little number here.
That's the worry,
Yeah,
though. That's the worry that they go and create their own little credit card on a blockchain, um, which will probably happen.
I think they'll do gold or Bitcoin. I think they'll price it in gold or price it in Bitcoin because that'll then accrue. Because right now, let's say they sell a barrel of oil and they get $70. There's not much happening with that because the Fed can control a lot of that, and demand and supply. If they take gold for it or Bitcoin and it's appreciating as an asset, so they're selling one asset and then getting another asset that's appreciating. It'd be daft not to.
Yeah,
Anyway, this is all
and
getting very,
yeah,
very
right.
economical.
That was yeah. Let's round it off there.
Okay, so how are we feeling then? How are we feeling about the start to the year? Is it a dead cat bounce? Are we far too? Have we been smoking the hopium, or do we believe that because we're in the orange pill matrix, we are on the right road over the next 5 years?
Oh, 5 years. Yeah, we're definitely on the right road. It's going to be a bumpy road, and in the short term, I reckon it will go back down and go up and then go down, and go up and down again. But it's going in the long term. Yeah, it will go up because we've just rattled off how much is getting printed, and added to national debt. So it inevitably will go up.
It'll go up. The credit card will continue to get used without without any comeback. And
Yes.
Jim's super Ponzi cycle will probably be it'll be talked about in universities. Which I want you to do a piece on Professor Duffy's super Ponzi cycle. I can see that happening, man. Coin.
Shut up.
I'm all over this. I'm all over it. Right, everybody. Super Ponzi time. We'll see you later. Oh my god.
Ciao.